So let's jump fairly quickly right into the data. One of the real issues that we have with millennials, doing research with millennials, is really a question of, do they trust us? They're a fickle bunch. They're hard to get to participate in research, and it's hard to really get the answers that you need from them often. So I was going to say about Julie, she spent 10 years working at Vice, which is on the insights part of the business. So she's highly qualified millennialist and borderline millennialist herself. My claim to fame, I guess, is I have a couple of millennial children. So I've studied it a bit. So one of the questions we just asked last month, a couple weeks ago, was to millennials. We asked them, what kind of sources of information do they trust? And not surprisingly, about strong trust for academics. Many of them came from school recently. You can see there were different organizations that had some levels of trust. Market research came in a pretty good place at around 20%, but still a lot of room for improvement. But then down there, brands and companies, only about 4%. So there's really a challenge to get millennials to really have a trust when it's important to them to really believe in brands and they believe in things. And yet brands don't seem to be talking to them. And by the way, politicians came out even lower. They didn't make the cut. They were about 3%. And yet, so the perfect source for building a research panel then is essentially a company where that has the trust from those millennials. And that's why I've been working here with Vice, because they have a very authentic voice in their communications. And their visitors and their viewers have a high degree of trust in that company. So what we've done is we've formed a sort of a partnership where Vice Media and myself from Kantar, and specifically from the Lightspeed, the panel company aspect of Kantar, are each kind of working on the things that we do best. Vice knows how to engage millennials. They know how to entertain them, and we know how to, to elicit research and run research programs and panels. So for those of you that maybe aren't that familiar with Vice, I'm going to ask Julie first to give us a bit more background about the company.
Yeah, I'll do the elevator pitch. So we're the fastest growing youth media company out there today. We have about 30 and constantly growing offices around the world. Each of those offices combined makes up to 10 hours of original content, video content every single day. In terms of audience, we have over 100 million unique visitors every single month, and if we expand that out to our digital network and those partners, we have over 300 million. So we do a lot of things. We have lots of different touch points with millennials. We have 4 major touch points with them. One is all our digital properties. We have about 14 and adding more every single day. Websites, these are all focused on passion points, whether that be food, technology, fashion, music, you name it. We also have a TV channel called Viceland, which is a 24-hour cable station focused on culture and lifestyle. We also have a news offering that's both digital in terms of Vice News and also on television with a nightly and a weekly show on HBO. In addition, we have Virtue, which is our in-house creative agency, which we help our brand partners understand who their young audiences are and create strategy and creative content for them as well. In any of the stories we tell, whether that be through Vice or whether that be for our partners, we make sure that we amplify those conversations and extend them out to all the touch points millennials are at through the social media partnerships we have. But what we're really excited to talk about today is Vice Voices. And this is a platform that we obviously built together with Lightspeed, which lets us get deeper into our audience as well as help our clients understand their audiences better. What we're really excited about is that the Vice Voices audience is really different than other panels. We have access to an audience that isn't usually represented that well in research panels, right? So they're more millennial, they're more male, they're more mobile. And we also thought, when we were thinking about building this panel, we thought about all the things that we do when we build things at Vice, right? We want to make sure that we're engaging this consumer, we want to make sure we're getting their trust. So really thinking about their values. And when we think about that for what we create all the time, we also thought about that when we're creating our panel. So we'll go through a few of those guidelines today and show you sort of this weird creature of millennials and how we translated some of those values into the panel itself. Let Frank take the first one.
Okay, well, speaking their language, first thing you have to understand about millennials is just how connected they are with their mobile devices. They're sort of inseparable from a millennial. About 60% of the time, it's never out of their hand. People answered that question just last month. So it's a different, maybe that's true for many of you that are Xers or Boomers, but for millennials, it's an integral part of their life. In a variety of ways. Various activities they do, such as, they sleep with the phone right next to them. Almost 80% of people sleep with their phone next to them on the bed. I'd never do that. Check their phone the first thing when they wake in the morning. Again, majority, 70% of millennials, first thing they do in the morning is they check the phone. In the bathroom, again, standing at the urinals, there's always guys there. It's part of their everyday life, and thankfully, there is some activities that they perhaps don't use the phone for or during, but it's the exception, not the rule.
Still some hope.
Other millennial multitasking activities is the way I would call it. Essentially, checking their phone while they're watching TV. A very large percentage doing it always. Like 43% of the people are always checking their phone when they're watching TV. At drinks with friends, you think socializing, but they're socializing and talking, checking the phone. And some very interesting stuff for the researchers out there. There's a lot of more data that would share at some other time about, how to avoid an awkward situation. A lot of people are kind of using the phone to avoid those awkward situations. And it's particularly interesting, some of the gender splits on this as well, for another day. Let's see. So all this time that they're spending, especially on social media, which again is primarily almost exclusively on a mobile device, we see that they feel perhaps a bit conflicted about it. 75% of them agree with the statement that they waste more time than they care to admit on social media. But at the same time, we feel that they're gaining some valuable things from that process, because it is making these millennials one of the most globally aware group of people, than previous generations, because they do have that ready access to information, and it's being fed to them in their hand, literally, constantly. And I think there is a much broader awareness of different cultures and different issues around the world as a result of that, as we saw again in the media. And for literally 45% of these millennials, they felt that social media was their main source of news. And that could be good, of course. It's good they're getting news. The veracity of that news could be a question, perhaps. Some other things that are important to millennials to understand is, again, their use of the mobile phone. They see it as a natural thing to make online purchases from their mobile phone. They're not going to switch to a PC to do that. So that's maybe a better vision than I do, but I always switch to a PC. And increasingly, over half of the people are already using it for making payments in stores as well in this country. So the key thing then to learn about millennials is that you can't separate millennials from mobile. And from a research perspective, that's a very fundamental issue. We spoke yesterday about the importance of mobile first and how we really, as an industry, haven't moved fast enough in this direction. I think that the largest generation now in the U.S. is the millennials, and they are inextricably wed to their devices, and they're not willing to go to a PC. So we've taken the approach that we need to speak in their language, and we need to cater everything to the device of their choice, which is certainly the mobile device. And so you can see that everything is mobile optimized and for using your fingers and so forth.
Right. Yeah, we like to think of it as that the phone is no longer separate from their life, but they're sort of like it is their life. It facilitates everything they do. So the next guideline we want to talk about was embracing complexity. Right, so for this generation, nothing is black or white. There's blurred lines everywhere. When we think about multiculturalism, about 44% of millennials identify as multicultural, compared to only 28% of boomers, which is a massive difference. When we think about even that next generation, all these multicultural millennials are having that next generation, so Gen Z is even going to be more multicultural. Even traditional gender stereotypes, millennials do not abide by these either. Doesn't apply to them. They take the definitions of masculinity and femininity, and they use all types of words to describe themselves. They call them human traits and don't really define themselves on either side of that binary. And it doesn't just stick to ethnicity or gender, it goes way beyond that. When you think about millennials' identity, it's tons of different things that make up that identity, and they're constantly changing. So we wanted to make sure that when we thought about Vice Voices, that we took into consideration all these complexities, even if that meant on the back end, it was more complicated for us to try to figure these things out. But I think it goes a long way to show millennials that you understand where they're coming from and you understand how they even describe themselves. So just simple things like the ethnicity question, right? We wanted to make sure that was multiple choice. Even though it might be different from the census, we wanted to give them all the opportunity to say who they were and what they identified as ethnically. And on the panel today, we have about 51% of our panel is multicultural. We did a very similar thing when it comes to gender. We gave them male, female, and other. And today we have about 3% that identify as non-binary. The last thing we want to talk about is adding value to their lives. And this goes beyond just cash and prizes for taking surveys and participating in research, although that does go a long way with millennials. We wanted to make sure that we were giving back to them. So obviously, data and online privacy is a big issue to millennials today. About 50% said they're very concerned about their data and privacy online. But they are willing to give that up if it benefits them, right? If they can get recommendations for content that would be interesting to them, if their apps know them better than they know themselves. These are all things that they're willing to sort of give up this information for to get in return. So we made sure on the panel that we were really giving back to them and showing how we were using this information and how this information was benefiting them. So we do this in two very specific ways. There's a place on the panel that's in the portal called Vice Picks, which they can go to and see what sort of content they inspired, right? They tell us all these things that they want and desire and believe in, and we create content around those responses and based on what they say they want, so they can see directly how their opinions are helping shape this brand that they're engaged in. We're also sharing results with them as well, so they can see what other people in the community said and kind of look through the data, and we can represent that in infographics or other sort of engaging ways.
Yeah, so we think that we've found the right mix of how to speak to millennials and to find ways to get research from them that's in a real community feel. And so we're very excited about this launch.